Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic podcast. I'm Drew Nepley, and I'm joined by my co-host and good friend, Alex Kapitko. How you doing, Alex?
Hey, Drew. I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Had a long weekend, but in a good way. It's been, I've been working hard at this during the primaries, and that's kind of the topic of our debate or discussion today. Is just an update on where the Democratic primary are at. How are the candidates looking? Yesterday we just had the South Carolina primary, so yeah, we're just gonna get caught up, kind of discuss what we think is happening, any big changes in the party, and go from there. So just to start off, basically yesterday Joe Biden crushed it in the South Carolina primary. And I think he needed to. I think this was a make it or break it moment for his campaign. I think if he was second, right, if Bernie Sanders got a win, I think he would have been done. I think Bernie Sanders would have been a clear-cut pick for the nomination. But no, instead, Joe Biden crushed it, getting 48.4% of the vote, whereas second was Bernie Sanders with just under 20%. So a pretty significant lead, like very significant lead that I think he needed. He needed this base, he needed this win, and now I think he might feel that he has the momentum to try and start taking states back. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said very well, it's Joe Biden needed this, and I am not particularly surprised that he won, just because this demographic and the voting base he has in South Carolina, it pretty much was showing that people were going to go his direction. But a couple other takeaways that I thought were interesting was that Elizabeth Warren is still trying to survive. She's gone a month without winning any delegates. And so obviously things are not looking great for her. And I think I just saw about 20 minutes ago that Tom Steyer has announced that he's dropped out of the presidential race.
Right.
And this is actually after he came in third. But he's won 0 delegates so far. So obviously I think all he did again was take votes away from moderates down the road. But this was a good showing, and a bigger issue is I think we saw from this is according to the New York Times, is that Bernie Sanders might be showing some issues inside of his campaign because he was hoping to get black voters who would split along generational lines in South Carolina, but that did not happen because Biden obviously carried young and older in a landslide in this. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think Bernie Sanders is obviously he came in second, but he came in a significant, like way down in second compared to Joe Biden. So it shows that Bernie Sanders is not this unstoppable revolutionary force, right? Like his momentum just kind of halted a bit, whereas Joe Biden's is picking up. Now, of course, we'll have to see again come Super Tuesday, which I'm so excited for, just in a couple days now. Super Tuesday is going to be really where we see, the boys become men, so to speak, right? That's when Bloomberg is going to actually be on the ballot come Super Tuesday, because again, Bloomberg has been, if you're a listener in the United States, you've seen Bloomberg ads multiple times, whether it's online or on the TV. You're seeing them everywhere, but we haven't seen them on the ballot. So we have yet to see what that $500 million is doing to the voter in a real election. So that'll be interesting to see. But Joe Biden definitely is the big winner. Bernie Sanders, I say, would be one of the losers, like you mentioned. He's not having this youth landslide revolution like he thought he was going to have, and he's not pulling in people of color nearly as much as he thought he would. Part of that, I think, was the Jim Clyburn endorsement of Joe Biden. Most of the time, pundits think that endorsements really don't do much, but it seemed like Jim Clyburn's endorsement was a big deal. And then in an exit poll, CNN reports that almost half of South Carolina voters said that Jim Clyburn's endorsement of Joe Biden was either critical or one of the several key factors in their decision to vote for Joe Biden. Jim Clyburn is a longtime African-American congressman. He is, he's basically an institution in South Carolina. So it was just interesting to see that endorsements can and do matter. And this one might have helped Joe Biden have such a strong lead in this state.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think it does also show that Joe Biden, if he does it right, can still have a political apparatus and machine behind him. He's still relatively popular. I think that it's been a mixture of his gaffes and also Bernie's growing strength that have kind of put him into a weird limelight. But this was nice to see. Honestly, I think, like I've said on this, I don't particularly think Biden is the best candidate, but I think he's almost the necessary candidate. Obviously, we could have a long debate about that, but it was nice to see someone as a moderate come out with a majority vote in this primary because, as we were seeing, it was a big divided vote between Klobuchar, Buttigieg, him, Steyer, and others. But, in this one, he really has almost 50%, which is nice, where Buttigieg only had 8.2%, and Elizabeth Warren 7.1%, and Klobuchar, who's really, really dropped at 3.1%. So I think we're finally seeing moderates rallying around one candidate, which I think if I was Bernie Sanders' campaign, it would terrify me, just because they've kind of been running off of this disarray inside of the center. I was listening to Brooks and Shields, that show on PBS I mentioned sometimes, and David Brooks had a good point where he said, now that Biden is coming off strong in this, and we're seeing really a kind of dual threat. Obviously, Bloomberg, like you said, it's yet to see his strength. But David Brooks, who's a conservative thinker for the New York Times, basically said that Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, it's time for them to stand up and try to unify the party, because basically Bernie Sanders seems to be a direct contradiction to what their worldview and legacies are, right? So if we want a moderate candidate to maybe be able to fight Bernie, I think it's time for these Democrat leaders who are kind of the establishment moderates to step up and maybe bring the party around someone. And we have yet to see that.
Right. Barack Obama has pretty much, he's said that I'll just support the candidate of the primary, right? He's not endorsing anyone and hasn't endorsed anyone. I think you might be right. I think that, if the moderates want to start coalescing, that's going to have to happen. Now, Steyer, right? Steyer dropping out. He's not like he's polling too high, but he has enough backing that where it'll be interesting to see where his support goes, right? Are they going to go to the other billionaire that's pumping the media full, right? Michael Bloomberg, or are they going to go to more of the safe, we know this guy, party establishment, Joe Biden? I think maybe they'll split. But as more moderates drop out, I think they'll have to coalesce around Biden. Especially Bloomberg, right? Bloomberg is messing everything up for Biden, and I think that if Bloomberg has a really bad Super Tuesday showing, maybe he'll drop out and then Biden will take his stuff. But if Bloomberg has I think Bloomberg is the kind of guy, because he's already spent so much money and skipped the first primaries. That's crazy. So it seems like Bloomberg is the kind of guy that will just, even if he has a little bit of momentum, he'll stick it out in the long run, and that is terrible for moderates.
That's a very good point, but the only thing that I worry about, I don't worry about Bloomberg, it's just not a worry, but it's a thought I have, is that I think the more public time people get of him, like in these debates and these press conferences, I think the less they're going to like him and the less they're going to vote for him. He's kind of been shoved down our political zeitgeist. We've seen ads, we've seen his name all over. The media's kind of touted him, but every time he actually makes a public appearance, I find that his numbers seem to drop. So I think in time he is going to burn out, because money's bought him a name recognition, but it's really not bought him a lot of clout inside of the actual establishment. Right.
No, he definitely is this weird, like, even though he's a mayor and donors to like PACs and political parties, both Republican and Democrat in the past, he still has this in the context of this election. He still has this outsider kind of mentality and approach, right? Like, people definitely think of him as this outside billionaire that's coming into the party and just running a race on his own money. Similar to Donald Trump in 2016, similar-ish. But no, he's definitely, well, and interesting analysis from CNN here from, let me get the author, Chris Cillizza. He's talking about how Bloomberg is a loser of this South Carolina primary. Now, not because he was in it, because he wasn't, but because of his message is incorrect. Bloomberg was running on the idea that Biden isn't strong enough to win the nomination and that Sanders can't beat Trump, right? And then, his narrative just kind of got shot out of the water because Biden, took South Carolina with so much force that now Biden has these wind behind his sails. So Biden can say back to him, no, I am strong enough to win a Democratic nomination. We got past these small primaries in the beginning. Now we're into the big stuff, and I'm doing well again. So Bloomberg's narrative kind of weakened, and so I don't know. I think it's interesting.
Right, and no, and I think that's a very good point. Is I think he maybe underestimated some of the party and some of just this race, and it's true. I mean, I think that the Atlantic, article we were talking about last week, I think has a good point about maybe the reason why Bloomberg has been able to remain in the election, because he said some pretty nasty things about women, pregnancy, races, and he just kind of comes off as sort of an a-hole, like a
Yes.
very out of touch media. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure he's extremely smart and diligent, but he comes off as very disconnected. And the Democratic Party just seems so anti-billionaire and anti-corporatist right now that I just don't know who told him it was a good idea to run.
No.
But I think he's managed to stay afloat because of kind of this overinflation of calling out people for racism and sexism. You know what I mean? Like, it's this hyper call out culture we're in, where I think that people are kind of just numb to it. So when people are like, "Oh, he's racist and he's misogynist and blah blah blah," it's like, but is he? We don't really know, because it just happens so much. And I think that all was so true when Bill Maher said in HBO a few weeks ago, in quotes, "Well, Bloomberg must be the front runner because liberals are calling him a racist."
Yeah.
And that's such a true culture we're in. I don't know.
I get the joke, right? I get the joke, but it's also, he's definitely not a front runner. And,
Yeah.
I think there are legitimate concerns about the way he handled people of color in New York. I think there's I think there's a legitimate criticism there. You're right that there is this call-out culture that I think maybe the more moderate side of the party is like, oh my gosh, like, we will never hear the end of it, right? But I don't think that is going to be, like, I don't think that is going to be enough to have people support Bloomberg. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's in my opinion, there's no way that Bloomberg becomes the Democratic nominee. The worry is just, what is he? Who does he chip out of? Which, in my opinion, is Biden supporters. Because you're right. Like, I don't think the Bernie wing would ever go for Bloomberg. He is like a billionaire. He's like a crotchety old billionaire that has no idea. Is completely out of touch.
Right. So,
I think it's one of those things where, like, and again, like we said, he's being afloat. Like, he's not even in the water yet. Like, he's afloat because he's just buying ads, but he hasn't even actually played the game in the pool. Everyone else has been in the pool for the last primaries, and he's now just hopping in. And so I think it's obviously, you don't have to be a genius to know this, but Super Tuesday is where we're going to really see where this election is going. And to speak to that, 538 now puts a contested convention as more likely than a Sanders or Biden nomination. Because of the way it's looking, and Sanders is looking like he might take California and Texas. Biden is going to take North Carolina, Virginia. It seems like no one might take the necessary, what is it, like 1,991 delegates or something like that. I forget exactly the number, but it doesn't look like anyone is going to take enough delegates in the convention. Then you'd have a contested convention, which would be crazy.
Yeah, and that would be completely crazy. And I think 2 weeks ago, people were starting to think that was not even going to be a possibility with how Bernie was rising.
Mm-hmm.
And this is it is interesting because most pundits I've been listening to on the right and the left have said, "Oh, if Biden can win by 12 points, he'll be doing well in South Carolina." And so it's interesting to see that he's blown that completely out of the water,
Mm-hmm.
And it does create, I think, a large discussion that's probably going to be happening inside of the party and amongst moderates and amongst the establishment. And I think we're already seeing that in the last week, because I think the media and a lot of liberals, especially part of the establishment and the media, are starting to come with terms if they really want a candidate like Bernie. Like after that 60 Minutes interview, obviously he was criticized for speaking highly of Cuba's literacy rates while not condemning their regime. And this obviously has happened a lot. And I think while I don't think that he's some sympathizer for authoritarian regimes, I think there's a lot of questions that have not been asked yet that people are starting to ask. Like, why have you only, let me get to the number here, but why has he only actually authored one bill that has been successful? Why has he said that he's opposed the 2003 war in Iraq, though he did support the Iraq Liberation Act? I think there's a lot of things we have to come to terms with if we want Bernie to be the candidate. And I think we're slowly seeing that in these more moderate beds of the Democratic Party, where obviously South Carolina is probably not going to go towards whoever the candidate is.
No.
But we are seeing these states where we do at least need some clout in, kind of saying, well, this is a guy who would call for a large change in our system, and are we ready for that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the more we learn about Bernie Sanders, and we pulled up that list of 55 things from Politico that you need to know about Bernie. I was going through that, and gosh, if I was, excuse me, if I was like, a political pundit on Fox News, I would go to town on some of this stuff. The fact that his sister city for Burlington, Vermont, was in the Soviet Union, so he had a Soviet flag in his office. The fact that he wanted a honeymoon in a socialist country. Like, these things are like, yeah, it's like in the law, it's not like it's crazy, but it does look sketch when he's, so aligned with socialism. He says, oh, I'm not for authoritarianism, but he flew to Cuba in 1989 hoping to meet Fidel Castro, where he ended up just having to meet the mayor of Havana. He took a 10-day trip in the USSR. It's like, bro, like, it's not making you look good. And it's totally gonna worsen that narrative that this guy is like a pro-Venezuela socialist. I don't believe he is, but it looks like the holes in him are beginning to show, right? He's not this perfect candidate, and he's going to have a really tough time convincing people that he's not some crazy socialist, because he kind of comes off like a crazy socialist.
Yeah, and I mean, on that point, The Economist had a great kind of going off of that, which looked at, obviously they're not supporters of Bernie because they're very Adam Smith, laissez-faire magazine when it comes to economics. So they're definitely pro free market capitalism. But they had a point, is that Bernie has kind of come off as this righteous man image,
Right.
where he almost isn't really willing to talk about the logistics or maybe a more moderate version of what he thinks needs to happen, because he thinks that his plans are correct. And it comes down to everything from climate change to raising taxes and to free education, where he kind of wants to do the most extreme plan possible because he thinks it's the only way to do it. And he wants to ban all private healthcare, and most of Europe hasn't even done that. He wants to outlaw fracking and nuclear energy, while he should maybe just start with taxing the junk out of it. You know what I mean? Like, it's all these policies that it's just, he almost thinks that it's just his way or the highway, where I really do think that he's kind of just part two of Trump, where Trump has created this lane for someone to come, and I think Bernie's just the next step. Like, he's the answer to it, and I hate the argument that I hear a lot of Democrats say is, well, if he gets elected, he won't get anything done. I think it's slowly becoming a weaker argument, just because that's what people said about Trump. And as we have seen, he's actually done quite a lot through the executive branch since he's been in office. And he showed us that there is power and force, and there is political sway that you can use. And I could see Bernie getting more done than people think. And to me, that's the scary thing we need to address.
That's a really interesting point, because I would have been one of those critics that said, "Oh, he'll get watered down. He won't get anything done." But what you just said about Trump is really fascinating, because yeah, you're right. That is what people said about Trump is, "Oh, he'll get in office, but Pence will be the real guy, and he won't going to get a lot of it. He can't do half the things he said," and he has. And that's a really good point. Damn. Well, we'll have to see. I mean, again, because of this contested convention, it looks like some of the deciding factors will have to be super delegates, and that gets into a whole nother issue of I think that this election might have the Democratic Party really looking at itself and being like, are we running things the way we want to? Is our nomination system the best way to do it? Because let's say you have a contested convention, it's going to come down to super delegates than deciding who they just prefer personally. And superdelegates are a contentious topic, right? It's the idea that one person, because of their connections and money in the Democratic Party, has more of a say than the average Democratic voter. It's hardly democratic, in my opinion. And so it might come down to, people like Bill Clinton and major donors. I mean, there's now reports coming out that some of these superdelegates in the Democratic Party are also like lobbyists for the healthcare industry. These are things that especially progressives, especially Bernie's wing, which are very fervently against stuff like that, it's going to be really contentious. I think it's going to get crazy if we have a contested convention and superdelegates like that. The progressive wing is going to go nuts. So you're right that I think Trump wants a contested convention. He could look at that and say, look at how divided the Democratic Party is. They can't even get their own nomination together. The contested convention could be very good for Trump.
I think that's a really, really, really good point, and it goes back to something that I've been thinking for a long time since December of 2019, when Boris Johnson's Tories just destroyed the Labour Party in the United Kingdom. I see a lot of parallels between Bernie Sanders and Jeremy Corbyn, who was the ex-Labour leader. I think, much like Bernie Sanders and where the Democrats are going, I think the Labour Party in the UK overestimated their voters and overestimated the number of people that would support a very far left progressive agenda. And at the end of the day, you had a lot of moderate leftists not voting and a lot of people from the countryside voting for the Brexit party. And I'm just really concerned that Bernie Sanders is America's Jeremy Corbyn, in the fact that we could see, if, like you said, we especially get into a contested convention and then potentially have Bernie Sanders as the nominee, I could see the Democrat Party getting slammed. And it's quite worrying to me, because I think Jeremy Corbyn was worse of a candidate. He had connections to sympathizing with Iran, anti-Semitic remarks and whatnot. But Sanders, like you've said as well, is giving a lot of gifts to Trump and a lot of gifts to the right. And their media apparatus and their establishment and their mobility right now, I think, are much stronger than the left's. And I'm just worried that we could see a large electoral defeat.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's still a lot of time. Because the thing is like, first of all, like, I think, yeah, it's true that the right is loving this whole Bernie Sanders coming up. They're going to run with that socialist narrative tough. But to be fair, there is a growing progressive wing. I mean, the fact that Bernie Sanders is doing so well, the fact that we're like, oh, Joe Biden's back because Bernie Sanders was doing so well before, it is telling. It is telling that, the left is getting further left and the right is getting, in my opinion, further right. And it might have to, on the other hand, it might have to take like a populist candidate to really bring people out to the Democratic Party. So like in South Carolina, it didn't work, right? South Carolina, Bernie was not able to get people of color and to get young or old out to him. But in Nevada last week, it did. He was able to win amongst women, men, black voters, poor voters, Latino voters. So maybe when you get out of states that have such a deep-rooted institution like a Jim Clyburn and a Joe Biden, maybe he is willing to bring these coalitions of people together. I don't know. It's so it's so up in the air now because of this Joe Biden winning in South Carolina. We really have a real race on our hands, and if it stays this tight, a contested convention. But again, I keep saying it. Super Tuesday is really going to be the, what's the phrase, like the.
Kind of the big moment. I don't know.
The big moment, like when you test the water, right? Like you're testing the pH levels in the water. I think Super Tuesday is going to be the best, reading of where this election's going that we have yet.
Yeah. No, I think that's really true. And I do have to say though, what I think I'm a little unclear on is in Nevada. I think last week when you and I were talking about this, it was a big deal that he had got younger voters and older voters, women's and people of color. But as the more reading I've done, I think what's tricky in gauging the support for Bernie Sanders in Nevada is the fact that he didn't bring out new voters. He just took voters away from, the other candidates and the people that would already be voting. And so, yes, he did get some moderates that would have probably gone for Biden or Buttigieg or Klobuchar. But did he get the Obama-Trump voter to get out of their house and go vote for him? No. And so that's still where I just find it really hard with these caucuses and primaries to really gauge the temperature of the water, because we just don't really know, because all that Bernie did was get more votes of the people that were expected to go and vote.
All right. He's not like sparking a whole new generation of voters to yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I think you're definitely finding that Sanders might have the same problem with Jeremy Corbyn. He's overestimating his political revolution. I think that's a real worry.
Yeah, and I have to ask you, this is kind of a hypothetical, more thought question, but I've been thinking for a long time that I think that if somehow Bernie did defeat Trump in 2020 in November, that there would spark a form of civil unrest, maybe leading to some form of violence. I mean, nothing serious, but I just worry right now that where the nation is at, we have the right and the left that have been stretched so far to each side with kind of kind of a wasteland of a middle, that I just worry that the country doesn't need a complete 180. We don't need a complete just flop. And I'm just worried that because Trump's rhetoric since day one has been that he's going to win a second term and that he's going to keep, this great change and making America great again. And I'm worried that with his rhetoric and how he's got so many senators on his side and his base is stronger and angrier than ever, I just worry that a Bernie election could be one of the worst things that could happen for trying to bring, however we can, our country somewhat together.
Yeah, I mean that's a big thing. Is do we want to revert back to the status quo? Right, that would be Biden, or do we want to completely change the status quo, which is Bernie? And you're right. I mean, it's like Plato's The Cave, right? Like anytime you come out and have this major change and a new kind of worldview, it's going to be painful. And you're right. There might be some civil unrest, but I still don't think that that's just this democracy, right? You vote for who you believe in, regardless of whether or not the other side might like it or not, right? That's what happened with Trump. I mean, people probably thought that people in the Republican Party probably thought that with Trump, like, oh my gosh, if we have Trump in the office, the country's going to go crazy. And in some ways it has, but in other ways it hasn't. It's not like you're right that there might be some really vocal and perhaps maybe some riots or something like that, but I don't think that there would be like a civil war if Bernie became president. I think more likely is Bernie would be a 4-year president. I think he would try to do all this stuff. People would be really upset. I mean, the healthcare industry would be very upset. And we're also kind of due for a recession. We just had this correction in the market recently because of fears of coronavirus. But I mean, it was like a 10% drop in like 3 days. So if Bernie got in, I think he might get hit with a recession. People would freak out, and he'd be a 4-year president.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would probably be the best case scenario. And I mean, for me, obviously, it's probably no doubt to many of the listeners that I'm not a Bernie bro here. I'm not feeling the burn. The burn's burnt my toes a little bit, but I just think that going from a far right populist to an anti-capitalist leftist populist is just a lot for the country. When I mean, we actually, for the most part, wages are up and the economy, has with an asterisk here because, like you've said, things are changing. I mean, but I just feel like that's a large shift, and I think people also, a lot of people, especially the people that don't follow this as much as we do, don't understand that Bernie's not like a French or Norwegian leftist who just wants, like you and I talked about, a social democracy. He wants a socialist system through free elections. Yeah, and that's just such a large transition from where we're at now. Is that I just don't see that working for people. But you never know. I mean, sometimes it's true that maybe he won't get a lot done, but he will bring a kind of a moral capitalism and some moral regulation to things that do need to be. So I don't know. And I mean, one positive thing is that as a whole, most Americans do not like Medicare for all because people that do have their own healthcare want to keep it. But I think it's over 50% according to the numbers I'm looking at inside the Democratic Party that do like it. So it may not be popular in America, but some of Bernie's policies are quite popular within the party that needs to elect him,
Right. Overall, America's not agreeing with it, but that progressive wing inside the Democratic Party is growing. I mean, that's why we have Sanders winning these states. This was unheard of in 2016. It's a strange time, and I think the status quo has certainly changed. I'm kind of with you that I would kind of prefer a revert back to what it was before Trump, that kind of status quo. More like boring politicians, but like, getting moderate progress done, not overhauling our economy completely. It's just a weird time, man. It's a very weird time, and you're right that the moderate in the middle, it kind of feels like they're in a wasteland in between two trenches. And which candidate will be able to tap into that? Maybe not. I don't know. I do know, though. Yeah, I do want to, if it's fine with you, I do want to shift over a little bit to more the just logistical side of these primaries. If anything, kind of like regardless of the candidates, now we are seeing that the caucus system is outdated and ridiculous. Every single primary that's just run like a regular primary has been way better handled, instant results. the caucuses, especially Iowa, was, it was like really almost felt like it was run by fifth graders. Like it shows, though, I think that more states will be dropping the caucus system and just going for the primary because it's just so much easier and it delivers results faster. And it's just the way it goes. So I think these primaries have shown that we need to change the way we do these primaries a little bit in some of these states, and I think that'll happen as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, I think in general, primaries are just more democratic.
Yes.
I think the people are not supposed to be responsible for going to a long session of question and answers and then being asked their opinion. That's why people elect politicians to do this. People, like the average citizen, shouldn't be required to go sit through, several hours of a caucus. I mean, it's not going to get a lot of people, and it just doesn't get as many results. And so I think it's just more democratic to have people just go out and vote for who they want.
Yeah, especially like mail-in. Like in California, I have a mail-in ballot, right? So I get my ballot weeks before. I have time to look at it at my own leisure, and then I turn it in at one of the stations or I mail it. That's so much easier than going to an 8-hour caucus on a Tuesday and having to spend my whole time and listening to people debate and then give my first preference, my second preference. I don't know anyone that would prefer the caucus system over a mail-in ballot. Like, people are busy. If you want to get more people involved in politics, make them do it on their own time with their own leisure, like a mail-in ballot. So I think that every state should have mail-in ballots with an open primary and just let people vote.
Yeah, completely. It's very true, and I hope that this, especially this Iowa debacle, will hopefully put people in the right direction. And obviously, there's a discussion, I think, going on, and sometimes you need to go through the crap to get the cleanliness. So maybe this is the final moment. So there is optimism there for sure, but I mean, I'm just curious. I think it's going to be interesting because there is just this. I don't know how to really say it. Like, there's just so many factors going into these primaries and then Super Tuesday and then the election. I mean, we have, these reports of Russian meddling that is still happening. We have, the idea of now a contested convention. We have a self-proclaimed socialist running. I mean, it is something for the books. Either way this goes, this is going to be fascinating.
Absolutely. We are in some crazy times. It's super fun to cover, and it's kind of hard to analyze. For those out there, let us know what you think. Are we headed towards a contested convention? Does Joe Biden winning South Carolina now give him the steam to come back and become the nominee? Is a contested convention just giving Trump a second term? Let us know your thoughts. We are in some crazy times, and we'd love to hear what you think about it. Whether you agree with these candidates or not, we just want to hear it all. Anything else before we get out of here, Alex?
No, I think we covered it all. Just as usual, we love your feedback. We need your feedback. We learn from your feedback. You can, find us on YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and there's a bunch of third-party apps that keep showing up on our statistics. So I guess if you're using those, keep using them. We had a listener. We've had a few listeners from places I never would expect, like Peru and I guess Ireland I can expect because we had that episode. But I've seen Russia, the Netherlands. So yeah, keep it up. I love it, guys.
It's great. Yep. And stay tuned because we are definitely going to be talking about Super Tuesday once that goes through.